Welcome back to the Arkopia show. Today I want to talk about nature and humans. So before you folks on the right think that I'm going to take a leftist environmental route and go that way, and before the people on the left think I'm going to complain about environmentalists, um, I kind of have a unique perspective because I'm neither conservative or Democrat or liberal or anything. I have traits of both as the individual free thought person that I am. If anything, I am a bit of a classical liberal type with some conservative traits. Like, if it works and works well, let's keep doing that. And if it can be improved, like classical liberal, before the word liberal was kind of taken from that. But yeah, I got a unique perspective about nature and humans. So nature in itself is amazing. It equalizes out. It kind of does its own thing. Nature fixes things on its own. So I speak a little bit about getting back to nature and living closer to nature. But it's kind of a interesting thing. When I bought bare land on the prairies in the middle of Canada, it is scarce. It is some grasslands. It is some crummy poplar trees that aren't very good. They're not good for firewood. They give fluff. They don't last very long. They make a mess of things. Now, that mess, in the ecosystem that is here, might have specific bugs that are in nature, or create different types of funguses and mushrooms from those crappy poplars and things. But when you get bare land, it is scarce. There is very little food to eat, like for me or anywhere around. There is actual quite a minimal wildlife, like larger wildlife, like birds and sparrows and things. And like for example, right now we're going through a drought. So when I first bought my land, it was the most water anybody's ever seen, like a 1 in 100 year water. So all the low spots filled up with water, the water table extremely high, everything lush. And then fast forward, 7 years later, and it's drought. All the sloughs are dried up. You can drive across anywhere. Farmers are farming the bottoms of sloughs. There's very little standing water. So I dug out last year was drought as well, as far as I could with a skid steer in a low spot, cleaned it up. Now, what nature did in this flooding scenario was the land all flooded where there were, larger poplar trees and things, and then drought. So when the water receded and didn't exist anymore, all that was in there was thistles, foxtails, like a noxious weed. That's what comes when a slough dries out quickly, and dead trees. Now, you could say this is good for nature, that's organic material, those dead trees, and eventually, nature would fix itself or whatever. But I cleaned up a kind of a slough bottom and then dug it out a little bit, removed foxtails, took the good soil, added it to other places where I'm going to grow better things, and then dug it out so there's standing water. So there's no standing water anywhere close to me, but I had standing water this year because of that little bit that I did last year. The amount of bees and wasps and birds and bugs and deer footprints and goose footprints and ducks and wildlife that are coming to my pond is incredible. It is the best deer bait you could possibly have if you're, a hunter or something, because there is a shortage of water. So by me using a little bit of resources in my time, I made nature better. I cleaned up the land, created a standing water body that helps all the creatures around. When we first got out here, there's minimal birds, like maybe sparrows and things. Since my establishing things and building bird houses and planting different types of trees and things, we have more birds than I've ever seen. Our place is like a wildlife sanctuary now for different types of natural birds. They just naturally come. If you build it, they will come. So as a human, I am working with nature and improving nature, right? There's some things that are really important to leave, like natural grasslands that are deep rooted way down. You don't want to really mess up that unless you have to. So a portion of my property is left kind of natural with improvements that I do. So as a human, I am a steward of nature. That's how I actually feel. Now, some humans destroy nature, and some humans make things better. So, a good example of this, just another tangent, is Keynesian economics. So, a Keynesian will think that it adds to the gross domestic product and adds to the economy if you dig a hole by day and then hire somebody else at night to fill the hole back in and do that for infinity. A Keynesian thinks that if you smash all the windows in a house and have to replace it, that's for the economy. But nothing was built, nobody gained anything, right? It was wrecked and fixed and wrecked and fixed. And that's how I picture government today, because they have a Keynesian perspective on things. Whereas I feel it's good to use resources to accomplish something to make it better, right? So if you're using resources, using up oil or gas or precious metals or something that have to be mined and refined, and you put it into something that's kind of wasteful, that's not really good for anything. If you use resources that make things better in some way, then that is awesome. That makes everything better. Now, in my opinion, most humans make things, useless things and worse things, like use resources frivolously and wastefully in things. But if used wisely, it's great. And an example of this is some of the mining companies I follow. Colombia, for instance, they have a recent new leader in Colombia, and he's more of a left-wing environmentalist green economy type of person, but he's expressed the importance of mining specific things for a greener economy like silver, because he knows that silver is used for renewable energy like solar panels and electric vehicles. So if we're going to use gas and fossil fuels to dig big holes in the ground and drills and big equipment to mine a precious metal, a reflective metal that's needed to do solar panels, it's using resources wisely, going into the land and adjusting it to extract a resource so that we can use that properly for solar panels. And with that energy, newfound energy, you can do other things to make things better. But if you're just like government, digging a hole, filling it in, digging a hole, filling it in, that's very wasteful. And I feel most people are quite wasteful. Now, nature is very brutal. It is not nice. Nature is pain and suffering. An example of this is, go ahead and try to find an internet video on some wildlife, a predator like a hyena or a lion or an alligator attacking or getting food. So taking out a deer or a gazelle or an antelope or a hyena killing another hyena. That is a terrible way to go. Holy cow. Those, the food for the predator animals, the dominant animal, the meat eaters, it is shredded apart. its neck is torn apart. It is eaten from the inside out. And with hyenas, they pop the gut sac, and oh, it's brutal. And that animal's alive and suffering. It is terrible, terrible way to go. Versus hunting. Hunting is, if properly done, is, and I don't necessarily think we need a government body to regulate hunting but wildlife management type of thing. So a hunter, a proper hunter will take resources, so wildlife, if there's an abundance of deer, if there's too many deer, it can be a problem. If deer is managed, it is much better for nature. And when a human takes an animal, wildlife or a farm animal, that animal is their life is taken painlessly and very quickly. So with a deer, a proper hunter will shoot it in the heart and lungs, and that animal will feel a lot less pain than being taken out by a pack of wolves. That would be a terrible way to go. Now, for livestock, for instance, a 600-pound pig or a cow, a human that has steady hands and knows what nature is and is a good steward of nature and cares about animals and cares about everything can eliminate or utilize that animal or do what needs to be done with no pain whatsoever. So for a pig, you make an X between the opposite ear and the opposite eye, and at a proper angle, the pig has a very small brain. If you shoot it with just a small caliber, it completely eliminates the brain. The animal goes stiff and then kicks with only reflexes and then is bled out, and it's done. That is something other creatures don't do other than humans. A wolf will not be kind, will not have a conscience, will not have any sympathy for their food. Humans will. Now, humans also are the only, one of the only creatures we store resources. So in good times, we utilize good times and then store it for later, type of thing. That's how we flourish. But yeah, there's things that need to be done, and humans should do it in the best way, that is possible to do, instead of torture and, terrible ways to go. And most humans aren't like that. Most humans aren't, well-rounded humans. For instance, on multiple occasions now, I was witnessed an accident with wildlife, like deer specifically, and somebody will hit a deer, and if it's not too bad, they'll drive away, type of thing, and leave a wounded deer on the side of the road or in the ditch. That is like, I don't know if you've ever heard a severely injured deer, but the death moan and the crying is terrible. But you have an animal suffering, going to die a horrible, horrible death. On multiple occasions, I've helped that animal relieve its pain as quickly as I possibly could with calm hands, and most people drive away. Another thing that most humans unfortunately do is, let's say, for instance, the animal shelters are full, not taking any more kittens or something, and you have a cat that had a dozen kittens, and you don't want these things. They're a nuisance in your house. What people will do is they will, in the middle of winter, in a cardboard box, they'll drive out of town and leave kittens to freeze to death on the shoulder of a road, and thinking that that's showing them sympathy, or the best way that they could think of doing it, right? when you live close to nature and on the farm, there are some things you have to do. You know, for a few things that I've had to do. Like, I grew up in the city and not close to nature, so starting animal husbandry and taking care of animals and seeing the cycle of life and where does your food come from. There's some things I had to learn, and it gave me some very well-rounded, you know, firsthand experiences of doing these things and being very, very kind to the animals to get food. So instead of me being a wolf that's going to, you know, slowly kill something and torture something, I have the ability and the tools and the know-how to give out as little pain as possible. You know, people will talk about, you know, are your chickens free range? It's like, well, in the summertime, we do our best to let them kind of go root around and things and have a big run outside. But, and on their chicken coop in the middle of winter, their door is wide open. But you know what'll happen to a chicken outside when it's minus 30, let alone minus 50 Celsius? The chicken dies. So, are the chickens free range chickens? Well, that's kind of a funny thing. The chickens would be dead and freeze to death, kind of a terrible death, if we let them free range. So no, they're in a building so they don't die and they're more comfortable, right? They have access to outside, but you know, and for rabbits, for instance. So I tried rabbits in commercial cages, this system of how rabbits are raised on farms. And then I've tried the colony system. Now, you take rabbits and, or two females or two males together, put them in a colony, and they will fight. They will fight to the death, ripping out hair, chewing off ears. Terrible. Nature is terrible. So, are your rabbits in cages, or they should be free range rabbits? Oh, you want the rabbit to be like eaten and tortured to death, and like in the most brutal way possible by another rabbit? Or do you think it's nice that, you know, like climate controlled, comfortable, not going to kill each other, healthier? Or is it better to let like people take its course? I mean, people have this funny view when they don't live close to nature or what they think nature should be. And it goes for resources too, like, oh, oil is bad and mining is bad, and, you know, getting real resources is bad. Well, if you don't have any resources whatsoever, then you're not going to have anything. So, for instance, like, how about the carbon tax? So for me, it's kind of funny the amount of trees and things that I'm doing that, you know, are helping nature and making everything better. So both from my life and my family's life and anybody that's close to me's lives, and the livestock animals that I raise and the wildlife, everything is more abundant and better, and is kind of, I'm figuring out how to be a steward where everything works and everything's happier and healthier and there's less suffering and everything's just better. But with a carbon tax, what does that do? Well, it makes everything more expensive, and it makes it harder for me to do things to make things better. So I understand from the perspective of, you know, silly people that want to tax plant food for climate change, because most humans today live in urban cities and they don't live close to nature, and they don't do anything that makes anything better. They actually wreck things, like live in a townhouse and do some useless job, like dig a hole by day and their coworker fills it in by night, right? Or one breaks a window and the other one puts a new window in, and artificial grass, and, you know, it's kind of funny and pathetic what most humans turn into. So from that perspective, I can see, oh, carbon tax might help actually the majority of humans that are kind of wrecking everything and not making anything better. Yeah, it's kind of a funny thing. I can see the perspective of some idiot that puts in a carbon tax, and I can see the perspective of all the people that wreck everything instead of build anything and make things better. But then you have to take my perspective of the people like me, which is, I guess, very few, so I don't really count. Makes it harder for me to plant trees, right? Let's take away all fossil fuels. Do you know how many trees I'd plant with no fossil fuels? I don't know, 200 times less. Or I can use a little bit of diesel and a little bit of equipment, and I can plant hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trees and things in much faster time and much easier on me as well. Now there's things like we feed the world with, cultivated land now, like big agriculture. And that, slowly gets rid of topsoil. One thing in nature you can look at is, in nature, the soil is always covered by something. So nature is always trying to cover up soil. It doesn't want exposed soil. Exposed soil erodes away. So if you rototill a piece of land and leave it, eventually something is going to, probably weeds and things you don't want initially, and then natural grasses will eventually choke out weeds and things, and nature will eventually fix it. But with tilled agriculture, that exposes the soil, it erodes away. I don't care how good the farming practices are. When you do high intensive monoculture crops, it robs all the nutrition out of the soil. But this is how we feed, like, city humans. We feed them, pesticide and herbicide, seed oil crops like canola and corn, things humans probably shouldn't be eating to begin with, but it's cheap and easy to do with big equipment. So this is how we feed the world's population. But is that good? It is, but it isn't, right? For nature and being a steward of the land, maybe, but it's how we feed people, And maybe some of these people, somebody will be a savant and they'll create, some invention that'll make the world better, and because of all this, cheap food that we were able to allow them to innovate something else, like, who knows? But that, wood chip gardening, so it's kind of mimicking the forest floor. So if you go into a wooded area, that soil is damp even in a drought, it's not hit by the sun, and it's always covered up by something. So whether that's grasses or lower lying plants, or mulch like natural leaves, in the fall a tree sheds its leaves and it goes on the ground, and it's never disturbed, right? So if you want natural living soil, the best thing ever, you go in a heavy wooded area. Now for gardening and certain things, that's kind of hard, like to grow something that needs a lot of sun. It's kind of hard to do in a forest. So with heavy mulch, gardening, kind of like wood chip gardening, or it's called Back to Eden. If you haven't watched Back to Eden official video on YouTube, go ahead, check that out. But heavy wood chip, we're covering the soil, mimicking the forest floor, and then being able to do that in like sunlight areas, so it holds in moisture, creates the microbiology in there, creates the fungal system in there, and much less watering, because it's like we have a forest floor but in a different spot that man made. So that's making things significantly better. Right, instead of having dead soil and rototilling it, and that kind of wrecks all the living things in the soil, right? For all the vegans and vegetarians, so, a human meat eater, so a hunter or something, for instance, will, a deer might be cute and things, but a deer, is eating apple trees and wrecking your orchard, and years that there's too many deer that, like there's years I don't hunt because I happen to notice that the deer population's way down. A few years ago, we had a severe winter that was really weird. It snowed and then melted and then like got warm and cold and warm and cold. It created a sheet of ice over everything, and all these deer starved and froze to death. Like there was just deer carcasses in bushes everywhere. They starved. Just the climate kind of for that season, it reduced the deer population. Well, I didn't hunt for a few years. And then now it's like I have a herd of mule deer coming down to my little starter pond every morning, and every evening I have a herd of white-tailed deer coming down, and they're like checking out the apple trees and things. And so this fall I'll probably take a deer or two, and proper wildlife management. But anyways, so I'm not a vegan. I don't have any special diet. We try not to try to eat natural, meat, vegetables, fruit, things like that as best we can. My wife's kind of further down this health path than I am, and for our kids and things. But seed oils, no, we don't. There's no canola oil in our house, right? There's no seed oils, right? And we try to do organic things as best we can, right? And try to just eat healthy and as fresh as possible, or if we have it fresh, then we'll freeze dry it so it's fresh for a long time. But the vegans, when you create your vegan proteins or whatever it is, whatever crop, quinoa or something, to make quinoa, you have to till up the soil. So you're killing, I don't know, every foot that you rototill, you're probably killing 2 voles and a field mouse and wrecking the living soil and things, right? Whereas if you have natural grassland, you have a living earth kind of thing, and then deer naturally feeding on that and pooping on it, naturally fertilizing it. And then you should have a larger deer population because you're offering them natural grassland that doesn't have too many deer because you can manage that, or too much livestock, not too intensive, and a body of water, food, water, shelter, security for the natural wildlife and the livestock that's properly managed, right? And that's a better system than tilling up a field and eating quinoa to get your protein because you don't want to have meat off of it. So it's kind of a funny thing. Quinoa is not natural, and eating venison is natural. And for wildlife, it's really quite interesting, the cycles that wildlife will have. So there's a cycle between wild rabbits and coyotes, or predators and prey type of thing. So some of these animals like foxes and coyotes are I believe it's on a 7-year cycle. So 7 years, the population will be really high. And then exactly 7 years later, the population will be really low. And then another 7 years, really high. And it's the polar opposite for, say, rabbits, like cottontail wild rabbits in northern parts of Canada. And this is because there's, lots of coyotes, and lots of coyotes that they need lots of food. So those lots of coyotes will take out the rabbit population, and then all of a sudden they'll take it out to a point where there's not enough food for all those coyotes. So the coyotes will die off. And then when the coyotes die off, the rabbits don't have any predator pressure. So they will, reproduce like bunnies, and there'll be a whole whack of rabbits. And then because there's such an abundance of food, then the coyotes have more offspring, and their population grows, and then it grows again. And it's a 7-year balancing cycle that nature does. And humans aren't part of that. It's, humans just kind of expand, kind of like a J curve, until I think at one point our population finally collapses in some super long cycle. But, you know, we have the ability to not kill all the rabbits, but we have the ability to, defer gratification, store for the winter, store for, like, if it's a really bad winter, we have provisions stored, so we're not going to starve to death. And we just do that every year, right? If it's really, really cold, well, we have firewood that we processed the year before, because we had the ability to think ahead and defer gratification, work now to, preserve our lives later. And humans don't have these cycles. Now, a long, long time ago, humans did, right? So, the more primitive humans, before we got so advanced and so much technology and things, the population didn't skyrocket like it did in the last 50 to 100 years or whatever, the global human population, but it stayed relatively steady. So if we didn't have, healthcare and different ways to help in childbirth, maybe a mother would have 6 children and 4 of them would die. So they'd have 2 surviving children on average. And the mother would usually die in childbirth, or it was much more common, right? And a man, for instance, maybe a ripe old age, would be 35 years old or something, and then they die, like the average age of a male. And we invented antibiotics, was a huge, we keep everybody alive. The population skyrocketed. Now, this is you could perceive this as a good or bad thing. It's mostly good that we keep more people alive, but if all those people would be better stewards of things and not, wreck everything, then the world could be much better if it had much more people. But unfortunately, my personal opinion and the things that I see and read and observe, most humans do not make the world better. They consume resources without producing anything. And yeah, unfortunately. Where I'm from, the natural trees that are naturally here are these poplar trees, and they're the worst tree ever. Like they don't live long. They make a mess when they die because they don't live long. They give all this fluff. They're not good for firewood. Like, it doesn't burn very well. It's terrible. I hate these things. But we do have other natural trees. Like, my favorite tree is a natural to Saskatchewan tree called a golden willow. But we didn't have any on our property, but it is natural to Saskatchewan. So putting them in heavy mulch, they're flourishing. They've got lots of moisture, even in a drought. They grow fast. They're a better tree. So I'm introducing things that are, kind of natural, but that weren't here before, and I'm bettering nature, right? These foxtails I talked about, I'm trying to go in and clean up foxtails out of these slough bottoms that are now dried out, right? Foxtails are terrible, so I have to go in there and use a little bit of fuel and rototill and try to freeze out the roots and things as best I can without using chemicals and things, and trying to be a steward and try to stop those darn foxtails in their tracks. And I'm trying to, be a good steward of the land and make things better. And I do think that I am. Another kind of cool thing, so I cleaned up all the deadfall poplars and things, and in order to clean up the foxtails, I had to clean up the deadfall poplars that are just, what a nuisance in some of these spots. But I piled it all up, and I'm going to set it on fire and have a controlled burn to get rid of it. And with that organic material that the fire burned, it's going to create beautiful mineral-rich wood ash, very fine stuff. And I'm going to pile that up and I'm going to utilize it on other parts of my soil and growing areas and orchards and things to get minerals and nutrients and things into it. So instead of like in British Columbia and California and things, not wanting fires or not managing fires, like having small forest fires or controlled burns or taking down some trees here and there, and then having a little forest fire over here and a little forest fire over here. Humans with improper management, they'll have raging, expansive wildfires that get out of control, where with proper, letting a few forest fires do their thing, it's natural. After a fire, it cleanses the land. That mineral-rich material goes into the soil, and then new growth and better growth, and it's just an ecosystem, a different stage than a more established forest. You have a new one, and it prevents, raging out of control fires. So by me cleaning up all this fire hazard dead material, piling it up using some fuel, and then setting it on fire, cleaning it up, utilizing that material where it needs to be, it makes everything better. Now from a preparedness aspect, you want to work with nature. Like if you're a good steward of the land, you should be able to, I never thought I'd be a permaculture type dude. I could talk to my younger self 10, 15 years ago. I never thought I'd be talking about this. This is hippie shit you're talking about, Dean. What are you talking about? But permaculture. So if I do, I try to do multitasking. So if I'm going to do one thing, before I do this one thing, I should do this other thing. Or if I'm doing this, it would work with this, and the two things work together. So for instance, if I use some resources to build a barn, right? But I need to build up my building site, and I need some clay. So I'm digging a pond to get the clay to build up the building site for the barn. And then I'm going to, use capital to buy resources and build a proper barn with a proper angle on the trusses that allows me to save on all the steel and all that stuff for a ground racking solar system. And I can put that on the barn, so that works together. And then because I'm saving all the money on the ground racking solar system, it allows me to build a shell of a barn, and quite a large one, for not much more than the cost of the ground mount solar. And then when I have a larger barn, that means I can have more livestock, not intensive or anything, just more and more comfortable housing, like more room to do all my stuff that I'm planning on doing. So dairy, maybe dairy goats, but dairy cow, meat goats, meat pork, meat chickens, egg chickens, meat rabbits type of thing in a barn. And if I use those resources to do a barn, guess what? A barn is a lot better for a rabbit than it freezing its ears off outside in our winters that we have here. Wouldn't it be better for the rabbit to not freeze its ears off? That probably painful, right, for a creature, don't you think? So free range chickens, if your barn is big enough, they can have more room. You don't give them half a square foot per chicken, like intensive agriculture, but you can give them, lots of room, right? Or and again, bringing permaculture type principles, you can have rabbit cages, because rabbits will fight and it's hard to colonize rabbits, or I haven't figured it out, but you can have the cages off the ground and the chickens underneath the rabbits. So the rabbits poop and pee, and the chickens can be underneath and scratching around and rooting it. And that actually makes really good soil and compost, and is just good for everything, right? Like, try to make these systems work together. Way back in the pioneer days, I heard some old timers talk about in some smaller town buildings, like the local hotel, restaurant, pub or something, they'd keep pigs in the basement of it because the pigs give off so much heat that it would actually help warm the building in the wintertime back in the pioneer days. So utilizing pigs to help, the pigs are probably happier than being in minus 50 to be in a, cooler basement or something, but they'd use the pigs to heat the buildings. So all these things work together. It's just, whether it's permaculture or system building or being just a good steward of things and having your eyes open and being observant, but it all works together. And from a preparedness standpoint, that's kind of what you're trying to set up. You're trying to, you know, be resilient and create these systems. I read some articles and saw some things that were talking about how the Amazon rainforest was man-made. So some ancient people back in the day, and who knows the humans we had before we have recorded history, or you know humans, whoever's the winner in some war or civilization would usually burn all the history and all the books and literature of the people that they conquered. So who knows what was lost, but ancient people and their permaculture, they would like plant certain species and figure this out. So you have tall tree, canopy trees, mid-sized bushes, the small plant life at the bottom. And you know I actually believe that, like, the Amazon rainforest initially was planted by humans. So they just observed, planted, combination things that do well together, and that rainforest flourished, and it creates so much water, so much food, so much wildlife, so many animals, so many bugs, so many different creatures. It's just a tropical paradise, Garden of Eden type of thing. And I actually totally believe that ancient humans, were stewards and started that. If those ancient humans, you can think about, if that's true, if those ancient humans didn't do that, then we wouldn't have an Amazon rainforest. Like, for instance, on the prairies where I'm at, like I said, when we bought bare land, it's just a wasteland of scarcity. All it is grasses, poplars, ticks, and mosquitoes, right? And minimal birds, minimal wildlife, especially in drought years if there's no water source. It is very scarce. And just as I figure things out and improve things, I get more wildlife. I get rid of kind of some of the bad bugs, and I get better bugs, like bees or something. And I get more wildlife and deer and everything, and I produce more whatever I'm planting, so lettuces or tomatoes or something that's not kind of natural or whatever. Um, I plant that in better soil and I end up with better food, and there's no shipping cost, and it reduces resources for the rest of my days because I use the resources up front properly. So then I'm not having to buy, you know, tomatoes with not much nutrition in that were hauled 3,000 miles away for the rest of my life. 3,000 miles, buy a tomato, 3,000 miles, buy a tomato. Whereas build the, infrastructure and soil and things in a system and save a few seeds, and then I have, tomatoes here. Or, I think the resources I used on the greenhouse and even my shop, right? It's, used material if I could, or finding deals. But either way, I'm using resources, both my time and money and material that someone else had to initially manufacture, and that all cost commodities and resources and their time and things. And if I put them together in this puzzle, I think I'm doing a pretty good job of, utilizing resources to make things better. So with that greenhouse, like, I can start different types of things super early, even natural things like fruit trees and willows. I can start early and get established, and things that I can introduce into nature. Because I have that greenhouse now, it opens up a whole window of other opportunities that I can better other things, right? In that greenhouse, I'm also playing with nature, my own ecosystem, and trying to be a steward of my inside ecosystem as well as the natural ecosystem outside. But every way is just me as a human being a steward of nature, a steward of the land. So on the left side of politics, where it's we shouldn't dig up any resources, we shouldn't do that, we should wear hemp sweaters and stuff, I can relate to them. On the right side, that we should dig up all the resources and things, and or utilize resources or the best resources for the cost, I can understand that side. But me in the middle, because I just have the ability to think for myself and see these perspectives, it's, you try to extract and do things with minimal damage to nature or no damage to nature. And then whatever resources come up, or, you try to utilize for the best way that you can. Right. So, in Colombia there, the green that I talked about, the green new prime minister or whatever, it's we're pro mining for silver, because silver is used for green energy, and from green energy you can get energy that's green, like it states, and then from that energy you can do a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So we're going to use resources to get the silver, and from the silver we're going to refine it, and from refining it we're going to manufacture it into solar panels or whatever it is. And that's just one example, right? Or people that complain about the oil sands in Alberta. So what are oil sands? Like, that's kind of a dirty, close to surface oil. So I've seen oil that's literally in rivers and bodies of water, or on surface. And what the oil sands does is it takes resources and it essentially cleans up the oil off the surface and extracts it so that we can utilize the oil, and leaves nature better than when it was left. And then you have people on the left side of politics saying that oil is bad and the oil sands are bad. Yeah, bullshit. Or people that think, oh, let's eat bugs now. Oh, that'll be good for the environment. So what we'll do for bugs is we'll build a massive factory to intensively raise these, bugs that have lots of parasites for protein for humans, as opposed to, I don't know, just naturally raising meat. Like, my goats are living their absolute best goat life. Life is good. Me, their guardian, protected them with, resources of fencing that I put up from predators, and I watch them and make sure that they're safe, and make sure that they have clean water and fresh hay in the winter and enough pasture grass that they're happy, and they're living their best goat life. At a certain point, it's going to be, they're going to serve their purpose of feeding a human, right? So they live their best goat life, and now they, a human. And this is nature. The goats keep the pasture nice and low. They're pooping on it and fertilizing things, and it's just this natural system that I made. But for some reason, people think, let's eat the bugs because goats toot or something. Like, goats toot. So I guess they think bugs don't toot or something, or a factory doesn't have any emissions, highly intensive cricket farming or something. What a stupid, what idiot comes up with these things? I just don't know. Another thing that always pisses me off is when I think of a university professor that, bought an expensive house across from the university and tells everybody about it, and then virtue signals that he rides his bicycle so that he can go do a lecture and lecture the kids and teach the kids about how bad carbon is in mining and capitalism and things. And then, meanwhile, he has somebody in a truck hauling resources to his house to redo his granite countertops or something. That professor riding his bicycle, he is maybe using a little bit less resources, or he thinks he is. No, he probably is, but his entire life is a waste, right? I always think the like cows, they fart, and their farts have a gas, and that gas goes into the atmosphere or something. But that cow serves a purpose. It's fertilizing the ground, and it's keeping the ground nice and cut. It's like, cows at one point were wild animals like buffalo or something, but now we farm buffalo, so that's have them in an enclosed, very large buffalo fence, so free from diseases of other wild animals, managed by a proper rancher, not too intensive. A politician or that professor, what purpose do they have? The cow farts, yes, but the professor does nothing except for make things worse. So who is the bigger polluter on the planet? The cow or that, left-leaning professor? It's kind of funny when you think about it. Yeah. I don't mean to pick on the left and or the right. I mean, it's not a bipolar world. I'm just a free range human with free thoughts in my head, so don't tell them. So that's just been a little rant and something that's been on my mind as, just me naturally doing things and figure things out and thinking about things lately. But maybe that gave you some ideas or some motivation that you too can learn firsthand and learn from others. And when you get yourself a piece of land, or motivation to get yourself a piece of land, and become a steward of the land and make the land and nature and everything better. And maybe if there's a low population of deer, you decide not to hunt deer that year, right? And, go eat something else. Or if there's lots of deer, maybe you take two to save the other natural trees in your natural orchard or things. And motivation to, in a drought, spend a few bucks and get a machine and use some diesel fuel and build a water body source so you can help the bees and the wasps and the ducks and the geese and the deer and the predators like coyotes even. Oh, that's great. That's great. Nature's better off for you using some diesel fuel and a piece of equipment to dig a hole. A wolf isn't going to dig a hole. A deer isn't going to, hop in the excavator and drive it. A bee can't do too much. Get some wildflowers and throw them out. Plant some clover for the bees, or alfalfa. You can help that. And when you plant a good alfalfa crop and then you take it off and use that to feed your other livestock, it's better for the bees, it's better for the livestock, it's better for the wildlife, everything. It really does all work together. And to be a righteous human on this planet, I think being a steward of your environment and the wildlife and every other living thing, because for some reason humans are the only species that have the ability to have a higher up level of consciousness than any other creature. Now, all humans definitely don't have this higher thing. They're more of a lower form of consciousness, of course, and are closer to an animal than a higher consciousness species or something. Yeah, however humans got here, or wherever we are involved from, or whoever put us on the planet, I try to stay not get into specific religions or anything, but or theories of how we got here, because honestly, we might not ever know. And if you think you know the answer, maybe you're right, maybe you're not, who knows? But however we got here, I think we're supposed to be stewards of the land, not wreck everything, but make it better. And by making it better, it also betters our lives too. So, something to think about. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time.